You, you already know what I'm going to do. You know what I'm going to do for the opening joke. I have to do it. I would be remiss if I did not. So, here we go. Con! 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 Sorry, it had to be done. Had to be done. Hello, interwebs. I hope you are all doing well, and I am very, very excited because I am here to review the recently concluded audio drama series Star Trek Khan, the prequel audio drama that tells us the story of Khan before Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, after he was abandoned on City Alpha 5 with Marla MacGyvers and the rest of his augment crew after the events of the original series episode Space Seed, finally filling in that gap. And starring, most notably, Naveen Andrews as Khan, who many people may know from his stint on Lost as Saeed, as well as Ren Schmidt as Marla MacGyvers, who I personally know from her phenomenal turn on For All Mankind, a really, really fun sci-fi show that I have critiques of, but certainly her part in that show is one of my favorites, and she does a really great job here as Marla MacGyvers. I'll be honest, I was both excited and skeptical coming into this audio drama, for reasons that I'll get into in a minute, but just give you the headliner on this. I personally think this audio drama, surprisingly, ended up being not only phenomenal, but I think probably the best released Star Trek piece of media that came out this year, which, is maybe damning with praise, because this is also the year that we got Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 3, but I also even count in there some of the novels and books that have come out, which I've also really liked, and also a lot of the comics that I also read as well. So there is a high bar, just not the high bar that many people would associate considering the Strange New Worlds Season 3 of it all. But this was really, really great, and I think Kirsten Beyer and David Mack, the two writers on this, did a really, really wonderful job. But to kind of get into my hesitation, just to give you where I came into this audio drama, coming into it, I'm a big fan of audio dramas. If you followed me for any length of time on this channel, you know that I adore audio dramas. I grew up on audio dramas. I particularly love Star Trek audio dramas. I grew up on stuff like Spock vs. Q or the Sulu audio dramas they released in the 90s. There's a long history of Star Trek doing audio dramas. I'm a big fan of Big Finish, which does the Doctor Who audio dramas. And I've always personally been this proponent of, like, we should not be doing nostalgia as much in, like, main shows like Strange New Worlds or Picard, and, like, doing this, like, looking back and bringing back characters to do the same thing they've always done in sort of the mainstream of the franchise. But with audio dramas, there's an opportunity here to bring the actors back, and this is where you could do, like, different cool, like, let's do another episode of Star Trek Voyager just as an audio drama, like that nostalgia stuff in that way, that like Big Finish does with Doctor Who. And it feels like it's less like the focus of the main series, but you still get to have a lot of fun. And then I also just love audio dramas as well, in the sense that, it is this cool medium where you still get actors, you still get directors, you still get music, you still get all this collaborative stuff that I love about making film as a filmmaker. But also, you, the listener, are a little less passive because you have to imagine so much of the stuff that's going on within the story yourself and come up with your own visuals. And sometimes that can be even creepier or cooler or scarier or grander than you could ever see on screen. And I think that sort of like participatory, like it's a collaboration not just behind the scenes, but in terms of your engagement with it, I think is just a really cool thing that is really unique, even just audio dramas, in a way that even like books couldn't do, which like you have to create the stuff in your head, but it's usually for the most part one author, versus film where you have so many people, but you're a little bit more passive in consuming it as a viewer. And so I really just love this medium for that, and I particularly love horror stuff. So always love audio dramas. But when I first heard that this audio drama was being done, again, I'm very much here for, like, okay, use audio dramas to tell these sort of like in-between stories. But Khan was always this one character where I'm like, does he need to be fleshed out? Do we really want to, like, make a character like Khan, who is this, like, great man myth, eugenics character, do we really want to add more complexity to him? And I was even more reticent when Strange New Worlds Season 3 came out, and this was coming after that, because if you've seen my review of that season of Strange New Worlds, and it's even touched upon in Season 2, that show has had really problematic views when it comes to genetics and eugenics in specific. I particularly think of 4.5 Vulcans of Season 3. And I talked about that in my video essay, so I don't need to go into all the nitty-gritty of it, but certainly that show has a very problematic look when it comes to, like, genetics, biological essentialism, do genes define us? that I think is very, very dangerous, especially considering the very fascistic and eugenics worldview we're seeing become more and more openly discussed in the United States and certainly around the world at the moment. So I was very much like hesitant seeing a Star Trek Con audio drama coming out after that, being like, oh, is this going to be more of that and more of like eugenicist apologetics stuff that I think is very dangerous to get into. But finally, to focus on the audio drama here, that is not the case. And in fact, I think this audio drama does such a good job talking about the themes of how history creates great men, even great men who are seen as villains at the time, and making humanizing Khan a lot more, but really getting at the core root of what causes this great men mentality, the sort of might makes right mentality that Khan was raised up in and continues to push, and how he has ultimately an inability to, in the language of the story's own terms, a limited imagination, and how he can think about relationships, both between the people that he leads, but also between other cultures, and this fundamental problem of like prevents him from being someone who could fit into a very Starfleet world where we view cultures as people that we like interact with and grow with and try to, build up a more egalitarian society while celebrating people's individual diversity and not trying to homogenize. And the story here really finds just such cool ways to challenge Khan on those fundamental beliefs in a way that not only fits in very well with the the story of Wrath of Khan, the movie, but makes Khan just a much deeper and more thoughtful villain, but never, I think, taking away from the core problems. Like, I think there's always a danger when you humanize a villain to make them like an anti-hero, a protagonist of your story, that like you ultimately end up maybe forgiving or erasing or ignoring the criticisms that his character was originally supposed to be meant for. But that is not the case here. We get this story, and I'm gonna kind of stay spoiler free towards the top here. I'll get into more spoilers in the beginning, but we see at the beginning of the show Khan sort of having this like, I'm their ruler, I lead these people, they will follow me, and MacGyver's constantly kind of pushing him as someone from the Federation to be like, no, you need to take care of these people's emotional health. It's not just might makes right. You need to lead them, guide them spiritually. And Khan's starting to understand that and grow into that, but also encountering like how he starts to question himself more when people start dying on this planet as they're surviving, dealing with the City Alpha eels and such like that. And I thought that was such a really cool idea. And both Naveen Andrews and Ren Schmidt do such a phenomenal job. Naveen Andrews brings such emotion. He captured the gravitas of Khan, but also brings in such really great emotion into the character that I really thought was very Shakespearean in a really beautiful way. But Marla here, I also want to call out, and I think this probably goes to the fact that this is probably the first time, I forget if Space Seed was written, Space Seed I don't think was written by DC Fontana. I might be misremembering on that. But this is probably one of the first few times that Marla was written by a woman, with Kirsten Beyer sort of being the lead on this with David Mack. And you can very much tell, because Marla, unlike her appearance in the original Space Seed, where like she's solid there, but it was very much of the 60s era where she's like, Khan is great, and I'm sort of falling in love with Khan. Marla does fall in love with Khan here, but you get a little bit more of her own pushing back against Khan, of like, no, you're wrong, and like the distrust and sort of like them having to come to understand each other a little bit more towards the top of this. And I think finally giving Marla a little bit more agency and voice rather than that sort of more stereotypical 1960s writing for women, I think was really, really great. And it doesn't undercut the fact that like she does fall in love with Khan and there's this sort of like romance here, but it manages to really, I think, flesh her out in a much more realistic way. The other element of this that I really, really love is we get to learn much more about the characters that Khan leads. We have a bunch of disparate characters like scientists and like his second in command, this Russian guy who is sort of like the main antagonist, or kind of the main antagonist of the show, but he's sort of like the much more like might makes right mentality that Khan is ingrained in, but Khan starts to question more. And we sort of get these different push and pulls of like how these augments were also mistreated as well, how they learned to see themselves as better than everyone else, but also, they were lab experiments, as we learn, and like they weren't even allowed to have kids, and how do they view procreation and like passing on their genes and legacy. And I think that is a particularly fascinating sort of way to look at these people of like, yes, they were awful people, and they did awful things, but also they are part of a cycle and a system that teaches these things and continues the cycles of violence and trauma through these might make right mentality. And I thought that was just a really thoughtful way to deal with these ideas and these characters that I particularly just really adored. And the other element of this that I thought was a kind of a stroke of genius here is we have this character, Rosamund Lear, who is, there's a sort of framing device for this story with Rosamund Lear, where she is, trying to investigate the history of Khan as a historian, post Star Trek Generations, the opening of Star Trek Generations, a little bit after Kirk died. And so we have her trying to go and unearth these audio logs that we're listening to about Khan's history, and her coming into conflict with someone like Sulu, who is the sort of leading the mission, the Excelsior mission to take her there, who obviously wants to view Khan much more black and white ways of Khan was an awful guy, and he's also, Sulu, you can tell, is kind of grieving Kirk's recent death from Generations at the Enterprise B, or at least what he thinks was Kirk's death at the Enterprise B. The rest of that movie notwithstanding, the nexus of it all notwithstanding, but he's still grieving and wants to protect Kirk's legacy that Lear is sort of more pushing against. Did Kirk leave Khan there to die? Was Khan in many ways a product of Kirk's own decisions? And did Kirk fail in a lot of respects here? And this interrogates that. And you have Tuvok, played by Tim Russ, on the Excelsior. We know he's on the Excelsior from his time in Flashback, the episode from Voyager, sort of mediating the two of these characters, who was Lear being much more anti-Federation and want to recuperate Khan's image, and Sulu, who is much more antagonistic to that recuperation. And I think Tuvok plays a really fun role in navigating that. And there's some cool plot developments. It's not just the framing device. There is some, I don't want to spoil that in case you haven't listened to the audio drama, but there is a cool reveal at the end of it that I kind of guessed towards the end of this, with Lear and a couple other things going on in that framing device, but I think really works well with a lot of the themes of this story that I really adored. I'm going to get into more spoilers here, so if you have not seen the audio drama, jump off here. I would highly recommend it. It is phenomenal, and again, one of the best Star Trek things that has come out this year, which I mean is high praise, Strange New World Season 3 notwithstanding. But to get into some spoilers in the end of this, what I particularly loved here was we get the introduction of this other alien species that lands on City Alpha 5 after City Alpha 4? I forget the planet. One of the planet that blows up that sort of makes City Alpha 5 a hell planet for Khan and crew. That leads to where we see them on the desert planet in Wrath of Khan, Star Trek II Wrath of Khan. But there's an alien species there, and Khan ultimately, has to learn to kind of start to trust them. And you see, and there's this really brilliant episode about talking about it, limits of imagination, of he fundamentally cannot trust them. And we get this sense over and over again that this alien species is kind, is caring, is actually trying to help Khan and the crew and form a partnership. And Khan ultimately agrees to do that, but he still does not fundamentally trust them. He cannot trust that someone else might actually care for others and might actually sacrifice of themselves to make sure others survive. And he can't think that way because he's been so ingrained of human nature, and the nature of all living beings is to might makes right, control, beat someone else, and he just cannot think outside of that. And you see his struggle, and it's a really good way again to get at these ideas of how these things are systemic and perpetuate themselves. Hurt people, as they say. And it doesn't. And I love that the story never lets Khan off the hook. He does some somewhat reprehensible things towards the end of this story to protect his own legacy, his own daughter. Spoiler there. And betrays people, but you see him starting to struggle with this and struggle against this mentality. And I thought that was just, again, such a really brilliant way of drawing out these ideas of we need to be able to break these cycles, you need to break this mentality. And for some people, it is so hard to break it because it's been so ingrained in how they view themselves and define the world and the universe. And how someone like Lear, as spoiler again here, who is his daughter, sort of starts to break that, and starts to integrate into a Federation society towards the end here. I thought that was just, it is exactly how a story like this should be broken down. Because the danger always with stories about eugenics is you end up justifying the like, yeah, he is inherently better because he's, stronger, better, faster, smarter because of his, genes that they sort of did eugenics to make happen. And, it's just his own hubris or whatever that tore him down. But no, it's sort of talking about here, like, ultimately, yes, he has some traits that are better for like helping survive as eugenics, but it doesn't make him a better person and doesn't make him more likely to survive. What helps them survive and what's, ultimately gets some people to survive on this planet is because, or to escape this planet, is because of trusting others. And I really, and having collaboration. And I thought that was just, it was so well done. And I think so thoughtful. And again, Naveen Andrews does such a really good job performing this. I think my only major criticism of this audio drama comes from one story beat towards the end that I was very frustrated by, because you have Marla MacGyver's who's pregnant and she's having Khan's kid, and she kind of just very unceremoniously gets killed by some city alpha eels that she just encounters randomly when she's in her pregnancy pool, and then dies, and then her body is literally used as like an incubator for her baby, and she dies so she can give birth to the baby, and Khan sort of has to struggle with like, oh, Marla's dead, and how do I teach this kid the lessons that she would have wanted to teach them, and I'm struggling to learn them myself, which is an interesting idea, and certainly Marla did need to die, just given where we know we're at in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, where she is dead by the beginning of that story. But I found the way it was done so perfunctory. It was just like, oh, now she's dead. It didn't like come naturally out of the story. It was just sort of like, oh, she went to sit in a pregnancy pool and then gets killed randomly. And I found that to be a little bit forced in a way that I didn't like very much, because you could see the hand of the author there of like, well, she needs to die, so we'll just kind of yada 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 it here anyways. And then also it does this type of trope that I really dislike, which is this sort of like idea of reproductive futurism of like, oh, the mom needs to die and become a literal incubator for her baby so that the dad can sort of struggle with legacy and learning. And again, part of that's inherent in this story and the way it's being told. So I'm not like condemning it. Like an element of that always needed to like probably come into this just based on this being a prequel, based on the kind of story that they were telling, based on Marla having to die. But, and I certainly, I think him having a kid allows us to have these good questions. Like, you didn't need to do the kid story, but I think ultimately it is for the better, because it does allow us some cool, interesting questions to be brought up both in the framing device and in the main plot of the narrative. So I see how they ended up getting here. But there's a part of me that still can't help but being like, either you could have done this a little bit better, or like, the trope is just one that always grates me. Of like, okay, she's gonna die during childbirth to a degree. Like, it's slightly different, but that's still the same kind of element of trope of like, mom dies during childbirth, leaving dad to like deal with the kid and unsure what to do, which is just a trope that many women are relegated to within these stories of legacy, focused on great men sort of myths, or even deconstructing great men myths that we have here, that I found a little bit disappointing to see this going into. Again, to a degree, some of it is baked into just what the story is and what the guidelines of what the story had to be, given what it is with the prequel setting. But there's a part of me that still feels like it could have been done a little bit smoother, and a little less leaning into those like, let's fridge the woman and let's do this sort of like she dies for the baby sort of thing, in a less overt fashion. Let's just say, I think there could have been other ways to have done it. But other than that, the rest of this was really, really great. So heaping praise on this. A couple other things to mention just to say up front. The production quality on this was really, really good. They had a full orchestra. Like they got I don't know if they had an orchestra perform it, but they certainly got two composers who made original music for this, and they did such a good job. The music in this is really good. The sound design is really excellent. The directing of all the characters and actors were really good. I mean, shout out to not only Kirsten Beyer and David Mack, who wrote this, but also to Fred Greenhalgh. Apologies if I said his name wrong, but shout out to him for his directing, because I thought he just did a really phenomenal job with all of these actors. And again, shout out to Naveen Andrews and Ren Schmidt, because both of them were I think top notch here. And then also George Takei and Tim Russ certainly also did a really phenomenal bang up job, as did everyone in the crew. But them in particular were really, really great. The other thing I'll also say here is I really hope we get more audio dramas. I mean, like I said, Star Trek has a history of doing audio dramas, and we've certainly been getting more audio books lately than we had been in like the sort of fallow years between Star Trek Enterprise and Star Trek 2009. Like the last few years, like we've been getting less Star Trek novels, generally speaking, than we used to get. We used to get like one every 2-3 months, if not even more than that. Sometimes even one a month when Star Trek was running. Now it's been getting like only like 2 or 3 a year, which is kind of sad to see. So I hope we get more of that. But we have been getting a little bit more audio dramas. We got not only Star Trek Con, but they also did a Star Trek Picard audio drama set between seasons 1 and 2 with Jerry Ryan and Michelle Hurd playing their characters from that show, Seven of Nine and Raffi, which I also really liked. I think also was written by Kirsten Beyer, not David Mack, the author who wrote the Star Trek comics. I'm blanking on his name off the top of my head, but I love him. He's really, really great. Very nice man, too. Blanking on names off the top of my head, I'm terrible. I'm always terrible with names, so apologies to him. But, Kirsten Beyer's been involved in both of those, and she's done a really good job. I really hope we get more audio dramas. I really do think, my big worry with this is that they did put a lot into the production of this, like original music, original sound design, a lot of like big name actors, both on the Star Trek side and outside of it, which I think is great. But I worry that like that's a lot of money to sink into something that might not have as much return, which would be sad if like, the Skydance of it all looks at this and be like, all right, this is a fun experiment, but no, we're not doing any more. Because I really would like us to get more Big Finish style audio dramas where like you bring in a bunch of the old Star Trek actors, like, hey, let's do a Deep Space Nine episode. Let's get Terry Farrell back in here, and we'll do an episode with her and Quark or Kira or whatever. We'll do a Garrick and Bashir audio drama. We'll do a Next Generation one. Like, get these actors back in just into the studio so they don't have to like be in makeup or anything, and do those things. This is where you should be doing those like fun nostalgia stories that flesh out the universe. And then you can also do original stuff like this with Star Trek Con, which is an original story. Prequel, certainly, but an original story within this universe that doesn't necessarily directly tie into one of the big series. So I just think there's so much opportunity here, and I worry that, this was a big production and it might not get the return, and that might dismiss their ideas on a lot of Star Trek audio dramas. Hopefully this was a big success. I wonder at that, but I hope it does not disincentivize them from doing more, because I think you could do more of this stuff, maybe even at a lower production cost than this would be, and still do some really cool stuff. I mean, honestly, I've made no bones about the fact, like, a dream job for me would be to direct an audio drama like this. So certainly, I need to get on making more audio dramas to sort of pitch that to myself. But yeah, I love this stuff. I would love to see more of it. So I hope they get to do more of it. And then finally, I have always really loved Kirsten Beyer and David Mack's writing, but Kirsten Beyer's writing, she did such great Voyager novels. And, she's been involved in the Star Trek show. She worked in Discovery and Star Trek Picard. I think she's also involved in Starfleet Academy. But I really would like to, see her get put more front and center. Because as much as I have criticisms of, Discovery and Picard especially, I don't think they come down to her. And knowing her writing level on these audio dramas, as well as her own novels that she wrote on her own for like Star Trek Voyager, I really think, she understands a lot of the same themes and ideas that I really like about Star Trek. And I would love to see her get to be more forward-facing in the franchise. And same thing with David Mack as well. But like Kirsten Beyer, I know she has aspirations for working in Hollywood because she's worked there before. So I think basically what I'm saying is give her a show, because I really, really like her writing quite a lot every time I get to see it on its own and not part of like, the Star Trek Picard engine of it all. Yeah. That's my thoughts on Star Trek Con. What do you all think about it? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. I really love this. Hope we get to see more of it. Worried that we won't, but I hope we do. But let me know what you think. And with all that said, I hope you all, my friends, live long and prosper.